In recent years, there has been a growing number of reports involving unexplained objects in the sky, often referred to as UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena. These sightings have fueled speculation about everything from advanced technology to the possibility of extraterrestrial activity. And this next clip adds another layer to that discussion. Captured near the Tool River area in California, the footage shows a glowing orb moving across the landscape in a way that immediately stands out. Unlike many sightings that take place high in the sky, this object appears much closer to the ground, making its movement easier to observe and far more unsettling. What makes the clip even more interesting is that it doesn't go unnoticed by the wildlife in the area. A nearby deer can be seen reacting to the presence of the orb, pausing and focusing its attention on the strange light. This isn't just a distant object in the sky, it's something interacting with the environment at ground level. As the orb continues to move, it behaves in a way that doesn't seem to follow normal physical patterns. It glides smoothly, almost as if it has no weight at all, changing direction without any visible force acting on it. The motion appears controlled yet unnatural, lacking the randomness you might expect from something like a reflection, insect, or airborne debris. Soon, more deer begin to gather nearby, drawn toward the object rather than avoiding it. Their behavior suggests curiosity rather than fear, which only adds to the mystery of what they are reacting to. And then comes the moment that raises even more questions. At one point, one of the deer appears to approach the orb closely enough to interact with it, even attempting to kick or strike it. The response, or lack of one, only deepens the uncertainty surrounding what the object actually is. To this day, no definitive explanation has been given. Some believe it could be a natural phenomenon, such as ball lightning or reflected light behaving in unusual ways. Others argue that its movement and interaction with the animals make those explanations less convincing. And that leaves the clip exactly where it started, unexplained. Because whatever that glowing object was, it wasn't just passing through unnoticed. It was present, moving with intent, and even interacting with the world around it. In a way that still doesn't have a clear answer. At least it seems that that orb never directly harmed anything. The next creature, however, may have. Quick interruption. If you're enjoying this video, why not hit that subscribe button? We're on a mission to hit 500,000 subscribers, and when we do, 3 lucky fans will win a limited edition CreepyVids hoodie or shirt. Right now, 61.4% of you watching haven't subscribed yet. It's completely free, and your support helps us make even more awesome videos. So, don't miss out. Subscribe now, and let's get back to the video. A Reddit user known as jturley85 shared a video that quickly gained attention online, not because of its clarity, but because of how unsettling it appeared once the context was explained. According to the post, the footage came from a co-worker of his wife who had gone hunting in a remote mountainous area over the weekend. They had brought several dogs with them, but during the trip, 2 of the animals went missing. After an extended search, the group eventually found them, but what they discovered was disturbing. The dogs had been severely torn apart, with injuries that didn't immediately match what they expected from typical wildlife in the area. While trying to understand what could have caused it, one of them spotted something in the distance through a scope and began recording. The figure they captured appeared tall and unnaturally thin, with long arms that seemed disproportionate to the rest of its body. Its movement didn't resemble a normal human gait, and its silhouette appeared partially covered in what looked like hair or uneven texture. Some viewers suggested it might have been another hunter wearing camouflage, possibly distorted by distance and lighting. But that explanation doesn't fully address what had happened to the dogs, because whatever caused those injuries had to be powerful enough to do significant damage, and fast enough to do it without being seen. And that's where the mystery deepens. No one has been able to provide a clear answer for what was recorded or what was responsible for what happened out there. And as unsettling as that was, the next case adds something even harder to explain. A family reviewing footage from their home security system came across something they couldn't easily explain. Something that unfolded over the course of several minutes and involved multiple cameras across their property. It began with a single orb of light appearing on screen, hovering briefly before splitting into 3 separate points of light that moved in different directions. The movement wasn't random or drifting like dust or insects typically appear on camera. Instead, it seemed coordinated, almost deliberate, before each light faded from view. Moments later, something else appeared. A figure entered the frame, crossing onto the property in a way that suggested physical movement rather than a visual artifact. But what followed made the situation even stranger. Across multiple cameras, over roughly 2 minutes, the figure appeared to vanish and reappear repeatedly, moving between blind spots in a way that didn't quite make sense given the camera coverage. When the family reviewed the footage more closely, zooming in on specific moments, they noticed something else. One of the larger orbs seemed to release smaller ones, almost as if it were breaking apart or generating additional light sources. Shortly after, the outline of a person became visible again, this time walking near nearby train tracks before fading once more. The combination of light anomalies and a moving figure created a sequence that was difficult to interpret. Some suggested it could be insects reflecting infrared light, combined with a person moving through shadows. Others believed it was something more unusual, pointing to the timing and interaction between the orbs and the figure. Whatever the explanation, the footage raises more questions than it answers, especially because of how many different elements appear to be happening at once. And that takes us to this next sighting, one that proves that even in broad daylight, things can still go unexplained. While walking near a quiet bay in Mexico, someone recorded a short clip that would quickly make its way across the internet, spreading through mystery forums and social media, where viewers began debating what exactly had been captured. At first glance, the setting feels completely ordinary. Calm water, clear daylight, and nothing in the environment that suggests anything unusual is about to happen. But then, something moves beneath the surface.
Picture my phone.
What appears in the footage is difficult to identify. A long, dark shape glides through the water in a way that doesn't immediately match any familiar animal. Its movement is smooth and deliberate, creating ripples that suggest something fairly large just below the surface. Some viewers initially thought it might be a crocodile or an alligator, given the way it cuts through the water. But according to locals familiar with the area, there are no known populations of crocodiles or alligators anywhere near that particular bay, making that explanation unlikely. That's when the theories started to shift. Some people claimed the shape resembled a mermaid, pointing to the way the body seemed to move as a single unit rather than with visible limbs. Others suggested it could have been a large fish or marine animal seen from an unusual angle, distorted by the water and lighting conditions. But the lack of clarity is exactly what keeps the clip open to interpretation. Because while there are logical possibilities, none of them fully explain why the movement looks just unfamiliar enough to stand out. And that leaves the question lingering. Was it simply a misidentified animal, or something far less ordinary? One thing is for sure, not every mystery is something you can see. Sometimes, it's something you hear. A man walking through a quiet area in Kentucky experienced something that immediately caught his attention, not because of what he could see, but because of what he could hear. Beneath his feet, coming from somewhere underground, was a deep, rhythmic thumping.
I finally found it again after like 3 weeks. Listen to this. I don't know if you can hear it or not. It's pretty windy. Wow. It's getting louder.
The sound was consistent and mechanical in nature, repeating in steady intervals, almost like the pulse of a large machine operating out of sight. It wasn't faint or distant either. It was loud enough to be clearly heard, echoing through the ground in a way that made it impossible to ignore. What made the situation more unsettling was the environment itself. There were no visible construction sites, no nearby roads with heavy equipment, and no obvious source that could explain where the sound was coming from. Curious and slightly uneasy, he recorded the noise on his phone and later shared it online, hoping someone might recognize what it was. As the clip circulated, theories began to emerge. Some suggested it could be underground machinery, possibly related to drilling, pipeline work, or even distant industrial activity carrying through the earth. Others leaned toward natural explanations, such as shifting rock, underground water movement, or pressure building beneath the surface. But there were also more speculative ideas. A few people believed it could be something hidden, something deeper underground that wasn't meant to be heard. Despite all the guesses, no clear answer was ever confirmed, and that's what makes the recording so strange. Because the sound is unmistakably real, but its source remains completely unknown. And as unusual as that footage is, it's not even the most difficult to explain. Out near Dubina, Texas, a motion-activated game camera had been set up on a rural property owned by the DeMaul family, its only purpose being to quietly document local wildlife moving through the area. The land was known for its typical range of animals: white-tailed deer, wild hogs, raccoons, nothing out of the ordinary, and certainly nothing that would raise concern. For weeks, the footage reflected exactly that. Ordinary creatures, moving through the frame, triggered by motion, and captured in the camera's low-light infrared mode. But then, one night, something appeared that didn't fit into that pattern at all. The image showed a strange, blurry figure standing in the distance. Its limbs appeared unusually thin and elongated, its posture unnatural, and its proportions didn't clearly match any known animal native to the region. The lack of clarity only made it more unsettling, because while it wasn't detailed enough to identify, it was distinct enough to feel wrong. Speculation quickly followed. Some viewers thought it resembled a monkey, despite the fact that no such animals live in the wild in that part of Texas. Others suggested more extreme explanations, ranging from the legendary chupacabra to even a skinwalker, theories driven more by the figure's appearance than by any real evidence. A biologist later offered a more grounded explanation, proposing that it could have been a young black antelope, possibly seen at an odd angle under infrared lighting. But the property owner dismissed that idea almost immediately, pointing out that there were no exotic animals in the surrounding area and no nearby facilities where one could have escaped from. That leaves the image in a strange position, caught between explanation and mystery. Because while there may be a logical answer, whatever was captured in that frame doesn't immediately align with anything that should have been there. But that wasn't the only time something unusual showed up in a remote location. Shortly after moving into their new home in the Appalachian region, a couple began exploring the space, going through rooms, closets, and eventually the attic, just to get a sense of what had been left behind by the previous occupants. At first, everything seemed normal, but then they found something they couldn't easily explain. Tucked away in the attic was a small handmade object, something that didn't look like it belonged in an ordinary home. When they examined it more closely, the details made it even more unsettling. It appeared to be a figure, roughly shaped like a person, constructed from simple materials. But what stood out immediately was the hair attached to it. It wasn't synthetic or decorative. It looked like real human hair. That realization shifted the tone of the discovery instantly. Because objects like that are often associated with something much more specific, a voodoo doll, or at least something designed to resemble one. In various cultural beliefs, such figures are thought to represent a person and, in some cases, are used in rituals intended to influence or harm that individual. Whether or not those beliefs hold any truth, the symbolism alone was enough to make the situation deeply uncomfortable. Finding something like that in a newly purchased home raises questions that don't have easy answers. Who made it? Who was it meant to represent? And more importantly, why was it left behind? For the couple, the discovery turned what should have been a fresh start into something far more unsettling. Because even if there is a rational explanation, it's not the kind of object you expect to find hidden in your attic. And once you do, it's hard not to wonder what came before you moved in. Now, while that object raised questions about the past, this next one raises questions about what's still out there. Deep in a wooded area, far removed from any nearby towns or roads, a trail camera had been placed to monitor animal activity moving through the forest at night. It was positioned in a quiet clearing, triggered only by motion, and like most cameras of its kind, it was expected to capture nothing more than passing wildlife. But one particular image stood out from the rest. Partially hidden behind a tree, something appeared in the frame that did not resemble any typical animal. The shape was distinctly humanoid, standing upright, with proportions closer to a person than to any creature that would normally pass through that environment. What made it even more unsettling were the eyes, bright, reflective, almost glowing under the infrared flash of the camera. The owner of the camera was immediately disturbed by the image. The location was remote enough that encountering another person there at night would already be unusual, but the figure itself didn't quite look right. Its posture, its stillness, and the way it seemed to blend into the shadows made it difficult to interpret. Of course, there are possible explanations. Animals caught at the wrong angle, combined with infrared lighting, can sometimes create illusions that resemble human shapes. Reflections in the eyes can appear much brighter than expected, especially in low-light conditions. But even with those explanations, something about the image continues to stand out. Because while it might be explainable, it doesn't immediately feel familiar, and that uncertainty is what makes it linger. But what you're about to see next proves that you don't always need visuals for something to feel wrong. A Reddit user living in a remote mountain area, surrounded by dense pine forests, was already familiar with the sounds of wildlife. In that region, hearing coyotes at night, the distant calls of foxes, or even the occasional movement of a bobcat or owl was completely normal. But one night, something broke that pattern. While sitting inside their living room, they heard a sound that didn't match anything they had experienced before. It wasn't distant, and it wasn't subtle. It stood out immediately as something different. Curious but cautious, they decided to investigate. As they stepped into the garage, the atmosphere shifted instantly. They described being hit with a strong, almost instinctive sense of unease, the kind of feeling that something isn't right before you even understand why. The sound was still there, but what made it even more disturbing was how impossible it was to locate. It didn't seem to come from a single direction. Instead, it echoed in a way that made it feel like it was surrounding them, as if it was coming from everywhere at once. The volume was unusually loud, and the tone didn't resemble any natural animal call they were familiar with. It wasn't a howl, a screech, or anything easily identifiable. It sounded wrong. That was enough to make them retreat back inside immediately. Afterward, they tried to find answers. They shared the recording with friends, reached out to people familiar with wildlife, and even consulted animal control. but no one could confidently identify what the sound was. And that's what makes the clip so unsettling. Because even with all the usual explanations considered, nothing quite fits. So the question remains, does it sound familiar to you? Whatever was making that sound, it's not the only thing people have encountered near their houses. Late one night, a security camera positioned outside a home deep within a wooded area captured something that only appeared for a few seconds, but left a lasting impression on everyone who saw it. Through the window, a figure briefly came into view. It was there for no more than 3 seconds before disappearing again, but the timing and placement made it stand out immediately. The figure seemed to be positioned just outside the home, close enough to be clearly visible, yet far enough to remain partially obscured by darkness. When the clip was shared, viewers quickly began offering their own interpretations. Some claimed the figure resembled descriptions often associated with skinwalkers or other folklore-based entities. Others suggested a far more grounded explanation, that it could have been a person, possibly someone passing by or even attempting to play a prank. However, the homeowner strongly pushed back against that idea. The property was located in a remote area, far from neighbors or regular foot traffic, making the presence of a random person at that hour highly unlikely. That uncertainty is what makes the footage unsettling, because while there are possible explanations, none of them seem to fully fit the setting, leaving the moment open-ended and difficult to dismiss. And that takes us to this next clip, one that shows what happens when something comes much closer. A trail camera placed deep in the woods, far from any human activity, was intended to capture ordinary wildlife passing through the area. Positioned low to the ground, it was set up to record animals moving along natural paths, the kind of footage that would usually show deer, foxes, or other familiar creatures. But at some point during the night, something passed by that didn't quite fit those expectations. The figure moved extremely close to the camera, so close that only partial details were captured rather than a full, clear image. What can be seen in the footage is a thick section of long, coarse brown hair moving across the frame, followed by the lower half of 2 legs that appear solid and unusually built. The structure of the legs, combined with the motion, suggests that whatever it was moving upright rather than on all fours. As it passes, the figure even brushes against the camera itself, briefly interfering with the view before continuing out of frame. That moment alone makes the footage stand out, because it shows that whatever was there wasn't distant or hidden. It was right in front of the lens. Naturally, viewers have tried to find logical explanations. Some believe it could be a bear caught at an unusual angle, with the camera placement creating the illusion of upright movement. Others argue that the texture of the hair, the proportions of the legs, and the way it moves don't match any known animal commonly found in those woods. Because the footage never reveals a full, clear view, the debate remains unresolved. It becomes a question of interpretation, where what you see depends largely on what you believe is possible. But regardless of the explanation, one detail remains undeniable. Whatever passed, that camera came incredibly close, and it did so in a way that doesn't easily fit into what people expect to find in the woods. But what happens when there's no clear form at all? Just movement? A camera set up to monitor a quiet, secluded property captured what initially appeared to be nothing more than the stillness of the surrounding forest. For long stretches, there was no movement at all, just trees, shadows, and the faint shifting of light in the distance. But then, without warning, something entered the frame. In the corner of the image, a figure appeared. It moved in a way that resembled a human, upright and deliberate. But before there was time to fully process what was being seen, it vanished just as quickly as it had appeared. There was no clear transition, no visible exit, just a sudden absence where something had been moments before. Viewers who later watched the footage offered a range of explanations. Some believed it could be a ghost or some kind of paranormal presence. Others suggested it might be a camera glitch, possibly caused by motion detection errors or lighting shifts. And of course, there were those who argued it could simply be an animal, distorted by the limitations of night vision. But the way it moved, and more importantly, the way it disappeared, continues to make it difficult to categorize. And that wasn't the only time something moved in a way that didn't make sense. On August 2nd, 2021, a couple from Michigan checked the footage from a trail camera they had set up in the woods near their property, expecting to see the usual wildlife that passed through the area at night. Deer, raccoons, maybe the occasional coyote, nothing out of the ordinary. But what they found instead was something they couldn't recognize. At first, the figure appears partially hidden, emerging from behind a tree just long enough to be noticed. It doesn't resemble any animal they had ever seen before, and what makes it even more unsettling is the way it moves. There's something about its motion that feels off, almost human-like, but not quite human either. As the footage continues, the figure shifts in and out of view, its movement appearing controlled and deliberate, rather than instinctive or animal-like. It doesn't move the way a deer or predator would, and that alone was enough to make the clip stand out once it was shared online. The video quickly spread across social media, with viewers trying to make sense of what they were seeing. Some believed it could be a person in disguise, while others leaned toward something far more unusual, suggesting it might be what people often refer to as a skinwalker, a figure associated with folklore that is said to mimic human or animal forms. But the most unsettling part wasn't just the brief glimpse from behind the tree. The figure's behavior was unusually aggressive, not simply passing through the area, but reacting in a way that suggested awareness of the camera or its surroundings. That detail added another layer of mystery, making the encounter feel less like a random sighting and more like something intentional. Of course, there are still more grounded explanations. Some argue that it could be a person, a misidentified animal, or even carefully edited footage designed to create exactly this kind of reaction. But because the video never provides a completely clear view, it remains open to interpretation. And that uncertainty is exactly what keeps people debating it. Because whether it's real or staged, whatever appears in that footage doesn't behave the way you would expect anything in those woods to behave. And with that being said, we move on to a hiker and his partner who had set out to explore the remote moorlands of North Yorkshire, taking advantage of a clear winter day to photograph the snow-covered landscape. Armed with a digital camera, he captured hundreds of images throughout the trip. Wide, open fields, rolling hills, and stretches of untouched snow that seemed completely empty. About a week later, as they were reviewing the photos together, something unexpected happened. His partner suddenly asked him to stop scrolling. She had noticed something in one of the images that didn't belong there. At first, it wasn't obvious. The photo showed a wide open field, nothing unusual at a glance. But when they zoomed in, a shape began to emerge, a figure standing in the distance. It was clearly humanoid in outline, upright, and positioned in a way that suggested intention rather than randomness. But at the same time, it didn't look quite right. The proportions, the lack of detail, and the way it stood against the landscape made it difficult to identify as a normal person. Neither of them remembered seeing anyone else in that area during the hike. The location had felt completely isolated, with no other footprints or signs of activity in the snow. Which leaves a question that is difficult to answer. If no one else was there, then what exactly was captured in that photograph? With that question lingering, we move on to footage proving that not everything appears out in the open. Near the entrance of a private property, a surveillance camera had been installed to monitor an abandoned structure that had stood unused for years. The area was quiet, with little activity beyond occasional wildlife passing through. But one night, the camera captured something that stood out from everything else it had recorded. A shadow appeared near the structure. At first, it looked like nothing more than a shift in lighting, something caused by movement in the environment or the angle of the camera. But as it continued, the shape began to change. the shadow took on a more defined form, gradually resembling the outline of a human figure as it moved toward the building. The motion was subtle, but noticeable enough to raise questions. Shadows can behave unpredictably under certain lighting conditions, especially with infrared cameras and moving light sources. But the way this one formed, and the direction it moved, made it feel less random than expected. Whether it was a trick of the light or something else entirely remains unclear. One thing is for sure, the moment stands out because of how naturally the shape seems to form, and how difficult it is to fully explain. Which brings us to this next clip, one that takes us somewhere where strange sightings actually are nothing new. Back in April 2011, a video recorded in a cemetery in Indonesia began circulating online, drawing attention because of the strange figure it appeared to show moving through the graves at night. The footage was dark and slightly grainy, but clear enough to make out a white-robed figure walking slowly between the headstones. At first glance, it didn't seem entirely out of place. It could have been a person wearing traditional clothing, or even someone participating in a ritual or nighttime visit. But as the clip continued, something changed. The movement of the figure became more difficult to interpret. Its pacing, its posture, and the way it seemed to glide through the environment didn't fully match what viewers would expect from a normal person walking through uneven terrain in low light. That's when speculation began. Some believed it could have been staged, possibly created to generate attention or reactions online. Others pointed to the setting and the timing, suggesting that whatever was captured might not have been entirely explainable. Without additional context, it remains unclear what exactly was filmed. But the combination of location, movement, and timing continues to give the footage an unsettling quality. And that takes us to this last clip, one that proves that not every unexplained figure appears at night. At first, the video seems completely harmless, showing a group of buffalo calmly grazing in an open landscape, the kind of peaceful wildlife scene you would expect to see in nature footage. Nothing immediately stands out as unusual, and for a few moments, it feels like just another ordinary recording. However, when you look more closely, something begins to appear in the top right corner of the frame. A large figure can be seen moving in the distance, partially obscured and easy to miss if you're not paying attention. What makes it so striking is not just its presence, but its size. When compared to the buffalo nearby, animals that are already massive and heavy in build, the figure appears unusually large, enough to stand out even from far away. As it moves, there is something about its motion that doesn't quite match any typical animal behavior. Instead of moving on four legs like most large wildlife, it appears to be walking upright, with a gait that looks almost human-like. The shape of the body also suggests what could be fur, adding another layer of mystery to what is being seen. Because of these details, many people have suggested that the figure could be Bigfoot, pointing to the combination of its size, posture, and movement as something that doesn't align with known animals. At the same time, others argue that distance, perspective, and camera quality can easily distort shapes, making a normal animal appear far more unusual than it actually is. The footage never becomes clear enough to confirm either explanation, leaving everything open to interpretation. And that uncertainty is exactly what keeps the video circulating, because once you notice the figure in the background, it becomes difficult to fully explain what you're actually looking at. Now that was all for today, folks. If you enjoyed these horrifying clips, click to see more on the video on screen.